The non-avian dinosaurs were among the most infamous and successful groups of animals to ever live. They were responsible for producing both the largest terrestrial carnivores and herbivores of all time. And while size played a major role in their success, they were also incredibly diverse in their tools and weapons, all of which helped them establish one of the longest reigns in paleontological history, lasting for over 150 million years. This dominance was so significant that an entire geological era was essentially dedicated to them. The Mesozoic era, which encompasses the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, is often nicknamed the Age of Dinosaurs. Yet, despite their eventual fall, there was actually a time during this very era, specifically the Triassic period, when the Earth was not ruled by dinosaurs. For a significant portion of it, they hadn't even evolved yet. And even once they did, they had to endure millions of years living in the shadows of another group of apex predators, just as mammals later would under them. During the Triassic, a notorious group of predators emerged, pushing the limits of ferocity. They remain the only animals known to have completely dominated non-avian dinosaurs in every single environment they shared. Ironically, Ryans happen to belong to the exact same taxonomic clade as dinosaurs, the Archosauria. However, instead of being part of the division that includes birds and their extinct relatives, they belong to the Pseudosuchia, a group that includes crocodilians and their extinct relatives. It is believed that Ryans first emerged around 249 million years ago, during the early Triassic. Currently, they consist of 39 different genera, classified as Triassic Pseudosuchians. These creatures were typically large, quadrupedal predators, though many exceptions to these rules exist. Today, the group is often considered informal, meaning it is paraphyletic rather than a well-defined classification. What is well-defined, however, is that these creatures were pretty insane. Among all land predators to ever emerge, they came closest in size to rivaling the giant theropods. Most of them ranged between 4 to 6 meters, 13 to 20 feet, in length, making them comparable in size to giant crocodiles. However, many grew even larger, with some, like Postosuchus, arguably the most famous of the group, exceeding 7 meters, 23 feet. This made it the largest predator in its environment, yet somehow it was still outsized by certain relatives. For example, Saurosuchus and Prehistoric both reached 7.5 meters, 25 feet, already making them bigger than any known terrestrial mammalian carnivore, living or extinct. Thanks to their immense size, Ryans were almost always the largest threats in a Triassic ecosystem, towering over any predatory dinosaurs of the time. In some regions, they were even the top apex predators, a trend especially common in the early Triassic, when large herbivores were scarce, a direct consequence of the mass extinction event that had just occurred. Funnily enough, it was only when Ryans lost their status as the largest creatures in their environment that their biggest member emerged, one that still holds the record as the largest non-dinosaur predator to ever walk the Earth. This behemoth was Phaseolus. Hailing from northwestern Argentina, this giant archosaur ruled the land during the Norian stage, striking terror with its monstrous size. Even the smaller specimens within this genus were larger than nearly every other Ryan, while the biggest individuals were on a completely different level. Estimates suggest they grew up to 3.1 tons and 10 meters, 33 feet, long, making them bigger than many famous theropods, including Gorgosaurus, Majungasaurus, and Carnotaurus. To put it into perspective, Phaseolus wasn't just larger than any land predator ever evolved by mammals, but bigger than every terrestrial carnivore that arose after the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. Even the largest post-dinosaur predator, Baryonysuchus, was barely over half the weight of Facilosuchus. With such colossal size, everything in its ecosystem bowed down to it, including various dinosaurs like Coloratosaurus and Zoopesaurus. By this time, dinosaurs had already been around for about 13 million years, and while they weren't yet the dominant rulers, they had undergone significant diversification, including the evolution of sauropodomorphs. Unsurprisingly, these early long-necked dinosaurs became prime prey for Facilosuchus. One in particular, Lesimsaurus, was believed to be a major food source. This was no small meal. Lesimsaurus weighed around 7 tons, and as we know, big prey often leads to big predators. Unfortunately for Lesimsaurus, the threat of Facilosuchus was ever-growing. Studies of Facilosuchus fossils suggest it had rapid growth rates, a trait common among Ryans, but one that was actually faster than what was observed in dinosaurs, giving them yet another evolutionary advantage. And when it came to actually hunting dinosaurs, Facilosuchus likely used its titanic skull, which alone was about the size of a human, to deliver brutal bites. Its massive, serrated teeth were designed for tearing through flesh, causing rapid blood loss and shock, ensuring that no prey stood a chance. One of the key reasons Ryans were such formidable adversaries for early dinosaurs wasn't just their size, it was their deadly weaponry. Even those that weren't 3-ton behemoths had exceptionally designed teeth, long, razor-sharp, and slightly curved, resembling sabers that could deal massive damage with minimal force. Perhaps the best example of this is Saurosuchus, one of the largest and best-studied Ryans. And, in typical Ryan fashion, it had a massive head, roughly the length of a medium-sized dog. However, recent research on its bite force revealed something surprising. It was actually relatively weak. In fact, its bite strength was only comparable to that of a modern gharial, a crocodilian species that is much smaller and specializes in catching fish rather than crushing or tearing flesh. Despite this, Saurosuchus is still believed to have been an undisputed apex predator, hunting large-bodied prey by using its razor-sharp teeth to shear off massive chunks of flesh. The only downside? It may have been unable to access tougher parts of a carcass, meaning some meat would be left behind if it was too difficult to tear away. While some Ryans may have had relatively weaker bite forces, not all scientists agree that every member of the group had weak jaws. Instead, the emerging theory suggests that different Ryans evolved specialized bite mechanics, allowing for a wide range of feeding strategies. Some were likely built to shred large, tough prey, while others may have targeted softer, smaller animals. This diverse hunting approach made Ryans highly adaptable, allowing them to prey on nearly every type of creature the Triassic period had to offer. Their diet wasn't limited to just dinosaurs. At different points, they also hunted dicynodonts, non-archosaur reptiles, and even other pseudosuchians. And despite having some differences in hunting styles, the Ryans remained some of the most dominant predators of their time. One of the biggest advantages Ryans had over Triassic dinosaurs was their natural armor. Much like their modern relatives, crocodilians, Ryans were covered in osteoderms, bony plates embedded in their skin. These bony deposits were mainly arranged in plates and were positioned along their backs, necks, and sometimes above and beneath their tails. But compared to other creatures with osteoderms, the Ryans had exceptionally thick armor, even thicker than what we see in modern crocodiles. And considering crocodiles are already highly resistant to cuts, slashes, and abrasions, this level of protection was almost overkill. Interestingly, Ryan osteoderms could be arranged in either 1 or 2 rows, but they were not always symmetrical. Some scientists believe this asymmetry may have served a social identification function, making each individual visually unique to its peers. Adding to their diversity, different rheons developed various osteoderm shapes and sizes. For example, Prehistoric had heart-shaped osteoderms. But trust me, these weren't for spreading love. Their primary function was, of course, defense. However, since rhyons were already the apex predators of their environment, it's unlikely that their armor was meant to protect them from dinosaurs or other archosaurs. Instead, paleontologists hypothesize that these osteoderms were primarily for protection against other rhyons. This theory makes sense considering that the armor was concentrated on the tops of their bodies, areas that were inaccessible to most other predators except for rival rhyons. However, not all rhyons were lucky enough to have this built-in defense system. A few species developed tough, scaly skin instead, possibly relying on speed and agility rather than sheer durability. One such example is Unveiling, a relatively smaller rhyon that lived in what is now China. Its nimble skeletal structure suggests it may not have needed heavy armor, as it likely relied on speed to escape danger. One of the most bizarre rhyons was Arizonosaurus, which, as you might have guessed, lived in Arizona. But when you take a look at this archosaur, the most striking feature isn't its lack of osteoderms, it's the massive sail on its back. Yes, just like some dinosaurs, certain rhyons evolved sails, a fascinating case of convergent evolution. Scientists believe this may have been an adaptation to the intense heat of the Triassic period, where global temperatures were nearly twice as hot as today. Because of this, one popular theory is that the sail helped with thermoregulation, allowing the animal to absorb or dissipate heat more efficiently. But Arizonosaurus wasn't the only rhyon to develop this trait. Other sail-backed rhyons included Dinosaurs, Brasilosicus, and Hypsilorhachis. And of course, thermoregulation may not have been the only purpose of these sails. Another leading hypothesis is that they were used for social display, helping individuals recognize each other, attract mates, or intimidate rivals. While these biological structures made sail-backed rhyons look especially strange, they were far from the only weird members of the group. Take, for example, Dinosaurs. This species didn't have a sail, but it had something even more unusual. It was semi-aquatic. In fact, it's the only rhyon thought to be truly adapted for life in the water, despite many other rhyons having crocodile-like appearances. Fossilized tails from Dinosaurs show that it had a laterally compressed tail with tall neural spines, perfect for powerful swimming. Other aquatic-friendly features included reduced dermal armor and an elongated neck, likely useful for catching fish. And yet, despite its aquatic adaptations, Dinosaurs still retained unspecialized legs, meaning it was still fully capable of walking on land. But thankfully, for any time-traveling adventurers, this water-loving rhyon wasn't the biggest predator of its time. Interestingly, it also didn't hunt in freshwater like modern crocodiles. Instead, it inhabited shallow coastal seas, making it an early counterpart to another Triassic marine reptile, Nothosaurus. However, despite its crocodile-like appearance, Nothosaurus wasn't a rhyon at all. But this once again highlights how rhyons seem to have a superpower for convergent evolution, a theme that would continue across their diverse evolutionary history. Even the most striking case, as ironically, there were actually rhyons that evolved features making them resemble the very creatures that would later overshadow them. Theropods. Now, remember what I said about rhyons usually being quadrupedal? Well, as I mentioned before, there were exceptions, and some rhyons decided to break that loose rule entirely. A few even developed bipedal locomotion, as seen in genera such as Chancysuchus, Ijasuchus, Papasaurus, and Kukasuchus. And it wasn't just their ability to walk on two legs that made them theropod-like. These genera typically had reduced hands, dinosaur-like hip structures, and skulls similar to certain theropods. Because of these similarities, it's easy to see why, for a long time, paleontologists actually mistook them for true theropods. However, we now know that they weren't theropods at all. Their crurotarsal ankles and pillar-erect stance clearly differentiate them from dinosaurs, proving they were indeed ryans. Interestingly enough, none of these theropod-like ryans lived alongside fully-fledged dinosaurs. Instead, they coexisted with primitive dinosauriforms, which, funnily enough, were also bipedal, just like them. In true Rukon fashion, it was also them who came the closest to rivaling giant theropods in terms of size among two-legged creatures. Now, not all of them reached such extremes. Both Aegisuchus and Papasaurus were on the smaller side, but Silosuchus was a true monster, even rivaling the measurements of Fasolasuchus. Its hip structure and hind limbs suggest that a matured individual could reach a length of up to 10 meters, 33 feet, while standing about 2.5 meters, 8.2 feet, tall, making it almost like the theropod twin of Baryonyx. However, while it was equal in length to Fasolasuchus, it wasn't nearly as heavy due to its lighter skeletal build. Estimates suggest it weighed around 2 tons. Furthermore, it wasn't even the meanest Rukon around, as it broke another Rukon rule, diet. Unlike most ryans, which were hypercarnivores, this giant was actually a herbivore. It possessed a toothless beak, which allowed it to shear leaves off trees efficiently. And Silosuchus wasn't the only plant eater either. Other bipedal genera, like Ixolerpeton, were also herbivores. Now, Papasaurus, on the other hand, was still very much a carnivore. It was likely a fast, agile hunter, much like small predatory theropods, and, perhaps surprisingly, for those who watched Walking with Dinosaurs, another potential carnivorous biped was Postosuchus. Some argue that it was fully bipedal, while others believe it was more of a half-and-half reptile, walking on 2 legs at times, but also using 4 when necessary. This evolutionary flexibility gave it a unique advantage in its environment. The evolution of bipedalism in ryans may have granted these creatures better vision, aiding them in finding prey or food. Alternatively, its primary purpose could have been locomotion rather than enhanced perception. But that's not to say that the quadrupedal ryans were slow in any way. To some, they might appear as oversized crocodiles, but it's crucial to remember that these apex predators were primarily terrestrial. As a result, they had well-developed legs that were not only long, but also positioned beneath their bodies, unlike modern crocodilians whose limbs stick out to the sides. This anatomical adaptation allowed them to be efficient walkers and runners on land. In fact, fossilized trackways found in Europe, attributed to the ryan genus Ticinosuchus, suggest that it could move at speeds of around 12 kilometers per hour, 7 miles per hour. That's a bit faster than an average human jog, and fast enough to catch many Triassic animals. However, researchers remain uncertain whether these tracks represent an animal in full sprint or simply fast walking, meaning that even greater speeds may have been possible. Additionally, in ryans, the front limbs were often shorter and more lightly built, even in the fully quadrupedal species. This reinforces the fact that these carnivores were more agile and nimble than one might assume, certainly not lumbering, sluggish land crocs. It was this combination of adaptations that made them such formidable predators in the Triassic world. Locomotion, size, teeth, and armor were what made the ryans the true kings of the Triassic and rulers over dinosaurs. However, dinosaurs weren't always subjected to their dominance. As previously mentioned, they hadn't yet evolved in the early Triassic, and based on current research, they are thought to have first appeared around 233 million years ago, roughly 16 million years after the ryans. This delay likely gave Ryans a major advantage, as they say, first come, first served. But to be fair, dinosaurs made remarkable progress in a short period of time. For example, sauropodomorphs quickly reached impressive sizes, and some early theropods, such as Herrerasaurus and Gojirasaurus, also became quite large, with both species measuring around 6 meters, 20 feet, in length. Even so, that still wasn't enough to overthrow the Ryans, as these early dinosaurs coexisted with far larger adversaries, including the giant Facilosuchus in Herrerasaurus's case. This dominance over dinosaurs is clearly reflected in the fossil record, as dinosaurs typically account for only a small percentage of animals within their environment, usually making up no more than 10% of the total population. Larger carnivorous dinosaurs were especially rare. On the other hand, smaller dinosaurs fared slightly better, with one of the most successful species being Quilophysis, a swift, lightweight theropod that weighed no more than an Australian cattle dog. It relied on speed to carve out a niche that was typically not occupied by pseudosuchians. Additionally, theropods and dinosaurs in general seem to have capitalized on Earth's colder regions, where Ryans were less abundant. But even in these areas, at least one or two Ryan genera were still present, maintaining their role as apex predators. And this seemingly unshakable reign was far from over. The presence of Ryans across the globe was largely a side effect of the continents being arranged into the supercontinent Pangaea during the Triassic. As a result, Ryans were found on every landmass except Antarctica. Back then, the world was drastically different in most other ways too. For example, a large portion of the planet was essentially a super desert, with only the occasional river or lake breaking up the vast arid landscape. These scarce water sources would have attracted plenty of prey for Ryans and also demonstrated their dominance, as droughts were extremely common. When these droughts occurred, fossils of Rauisuchians became more abundant, suggesting that they were able to seize control of dwindling water sources and outlast other competitors. Some paleontologists further believe that Ryans maintained their upper hand due to gregarious behavior, as evidence suggests that a few genera may have been social creatures. This is best exemplified by Dinosuchus, which was actually discovered in a group of 9 individuals. With so much seemingly in their favor, things weren't looking good for dinosaurs, and the future of Earth appeared to be set in stone. However, in an ironic twist of fate, something that would one day topple the dinosaurs' own reign, actually came in and saved them. A mass extinction event. Many people forget that the Mesozoic experienced not one, but 2 of the Big 5 die-offs, including the lesser-known Triassic-Jurassic extinction. Scientists believe that this event took place about 201.4 million years ago and had devastating effects on life. The details remain somewhat unclear, but the leading theory is that this catastrophe was triggered by the eruption of the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, CAMP, Earth's largest continental igneous province, covering an area larger than Canada. It is believed that this eruption, or rather eruptions, took place over a 600,000-year period, consisting of 4 distinct pulses that together wiped out 3/4 of all species, including a significant number of pseudosuchians. And as you might expect, the Rauisuchians did not escape unscathed, as every single genus within the group disappeared during this cataclysmic event. This left a world devoid of top predators, effectively throwing open the doors for theropods and dinosaurs to rise and take over. Now, why the Ryans perished while dinosaurs survived remains an unresolved mystery, but many hypotheses have been proposed. Some suggest that because dinosaurs were often found in colder regions, they were already better adapted to the climatic shifts triggered by the volcanic eruptions. Others think the explanation is more straightforward. Dinosaurs may have simply evolved faster, or perhaps it was just a stroke of luck. But whatever the case, it's clear that dinosaurs emerged victorious in the early Jurassic, setting the stage for one of the most dominant dynasties in Earth's history. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Angsing Suo.